Welcome to our webinar on name, image, and likeness. I'm Luke Fedlam with Anomaly Sports Group, and I'm excited that Courtney Altemus from TeamAltemus is here. Courtney, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Luke. Thanks.
Excellent, excellent. So we're having another conversation on name, image, and likeness. As we know, there's so much happening in this space, and with even so much that we know athletic departments are dealing with, name, image, and likeness we know is coming, and so we have to continue to have these conversations. So, Anomaly and TeamAltemus, we both focus on protective education. How do we educate athletes in various areas to help make sure that they're protected and can plan appropriately for their future? So TeamAltemus, as you all know, specializes in financial literacy, financial management. And Anomaly Sports Group really focuses on other life skills that have a basis in legal affairs and legal understanding. And so really, we've spoken together at a lot of events. Courtney, it's always great to see you. We know that we overlap in certain areas as it relates to decision-making, due diligence, and we just felt that it would be important for us to come together and really have a more in-depth conversation on how athletic departments can focus on educating their student athletes when it comes to name, image, and likeness.
Absolutely. It seems to make so much sense because we've heard from all these incredible people in the business of college sports, in broadcasting, and student athlete development, and we've had some great conversations. And I think it makes a lot of sense to pause here before we do our compliance webinar and just talk about what we both do and why it's so important, and why my favorite thing to say is #DDMC, and why we think it's so comprehensive for all student athletes coming into the era of name, image, and likeness compensation.
Yeah, so you heard Courtney say DDMC, and that really is kind of, when we think about name, image, and likeness, there are a lot of organizations that are out talking about branding and promoting your brand and commercializing your name, image, and likeness. But we look at it really from a protective education perspective. So DDMC, due diligence, decision-making, money, and contracts. DDMC, as we like to call it, we know that that can add to and supplement the conversations that are being had around the commercialization of an athlete's brand, but we want to make sure that we're providing that protective education in that space as well.
Absolutely. And with that, I think we should just dive right into it, Luke. If you could give us a little bit of update on some of the discussions in and around, we know the regulations aren't going to be out for some time now, but different groups have weighed in, and different schools are, it's interesting what they're coming up with in terms of their own programs to try to help student athletes. So if you could give us a little update and sort of where we are today with that to frame the conversation, that'd be great.
Sure. So just to be brief, because we could spend the next hour talking about all the different people who've weighed in and have thoughts. I mean, you've got obviously the working group from the NCAA that presented their recommendations back at the end of the spring, just before summertime. You've got most, recently the Senate working group as part of the U.S. Congress, put together their Student Athlete Bill of Rights, which is kind of pretty comprehensive, that they want to have included in any federal legislation that comes out of this. The NCAA has added to their conversation with Congress around things that they would want to see in terms of safe harbor and preemption of state laws and things like that. But I think what's most interesting that I'll spend about 30, 45 seconds on is the Power Five got together and came, presented their recommendations to Congress as to what they would want to see this name, image, and likeness regime kind of look like. And there's some interesting differences between what they have presented versus what the working group presented. One of those has to do with timing. And so they're recommending that student athletes have at least a semester completed before they're allowed to engage in any type of name, image, and likeness opportunity. They also talk about and are promoting the idea that student athletes cannot enter into an agreement or a deal that would either violate the school standards or conflict with existing sponsorship deals that the school might already have. So again, a pretty significant difference there. They agreed with athletes being able to hire agents or advisors, but what they want and what they recommend is that the agent or the advisor has to be licensed with a new certification office that would be part of the Federal Trade Commission. So again, that would happen after one semester is completed in college. And then the last thing that I think was very different as well is that they also are calling for all agent agreements and all commercialized opportunities, marketing agreements to be made publicly available, so that anyone could go and look up any particular deal that a student athlete signed. So again, the Power Five's recommendations are just that, they're recommendations. We're going to have to see as time goes on. We'll see the legislative process that the NCAA is going through internally, the potential rules that will be voted on in January by the Board of Governors. And then, obviously we know that Florida's law is set to go into effect July 1st of 2021. So prior to that point, we're going to see what actually is going to happen. And it'll be interesting to see where the final rules come out.
Absolutely. And we know, regardless of what those final rules look like, these athletes are going to be needing a lot of education.
That's right. They're going to need a lot of education to just understand what it is that they're getting into, right? So even just thinking about the opportunities that present themselves from marketing, entrepreneurship, and sometimes people even forget, like, it's not going to be just where they go to college, but there are going to be opportunities in their hometown. So they really are going to need to get educated, because this isn't something that's just for the elite of the elite. But when you think about it, Courtney, everything that comes with this is going to be a decision that an athlete's going to have to make. And so from your perspective, from the perspective of TeamAltemus and all the work that you're doing, kind of where should that process start for student athletes?
It needs to start before the beginning. The student athlete needs to do a full self-reflection and understand what their personal values are, understand what their goals are, and then see if those values and goals align with all the responsibilities that come along with name, image, and likeness compensation. Everybody's talking about the money. That's what we all talk about and we love to talk about. And this has been such a hot topic for so long. I think it almost feels like a foregone conclusion that student athletes are just going to jump in. But they already have two full-time jobs, student and athlete. And if they decide to engage in name, image, and likeness opportunities, that will likely become a third full-time job. So that whole self-analysis, and this really gets into our due diligence piece. I mean, not only is it important to do due diligence on external professionals, but it needs to start with self. And so that's really the first decision. And I know it's going to be somewhat overlooked in a lot of different places because, like I said, it's just a foregone conclusion, but it's so important. And it's a repeatable process that they'll start with, this self-reflection. It's not only going to help them related to name, image, and likeness, it's going to help them as a student. It's going to help them learn more about themselves, where they want to study, in what areas, why to apply themselves to certain subject areas more than others, and really start thinking about what is that career whenever that athletic career, the competitive athletic career, is over. So they need to do that, and then they need to really study, okay, if I want to do this and this aligns with my values and I want to make money because I want to have $100,000 before I leave college, or I want to have my whole college paid for if I'm not a scholarship athlete, do they have time for it? What are their time management skills? How do they manage their time? What is that going to look like? They have to map that out, or else everything could fall apart. The student part, the athlete part, and name, image, and likeness. And it could be a disaster all the way around, which is obviously not the goal. So once they have that first sort of process of self-analysis done, and they've decided whether to participate or not, they can then move forward into the other areas. But Luke, you and Anomaly talk about this decision-making process. So once they've done the self-analysis, how do they use your formula to actually make that decision? Am I going to participate or not?
Yeah, I think, you hit the nail on the head, Courtney, when you talk about having a repeatable process, right? I think, athletes are so used to having a repeatable process for what do they do when they step up to the foul line? What do they do when they hear, the quarterback make a count? Like they're trained in that process. So this should be no different. And being able to have a repeatable decision-making process is something that can, to your point, be applied as it relates to name, image, and likeness, but so much, in broader terms, and thinking about their life decisions that they have to make. So the process that we go to with athletes that we spend a lot of time in, we use the phrase REAP, R-E-A-P, right? It's this idea that you reap what you sow. And so when we think about that, it's R, recognize the decision, right? What is the decision that you're actually making? Because sometimes you can get such clarity just in really understanding what is the actual decision that I have to make here. E is being able to evaluate information. So now you're able to start pulling information based on that decision that you're trying to make. A, you're analyzing your options, right? So now you've got these various options available to you because you've pulled in all this information. You can bring in other advisors, family members, others who want to weigh in. Now you're giving them some guidance as to how they can help you in making a decision, as opposed to simply like, hey, what do you guys think about this? And it's like, yeah, sure, do it or don't do it, right? It's this idea that, hey, this is the decision I'm trying to make. This is the information I've gathered. Here are my options. What are your thoughts? And now you can go to family members, compliance, professors, mentors, coaches, and others, and bring them into this process. And then ultimately, P is produce a decision. And so when we think about REAP, that's a way, that's something that oftentimes we do in sports, like in a heartbeat, because we've trained to do that in a heartbeat. But what we really want to do now is teach this as a process, so that athletes now can apply that, just like muscle memory, apply that when there are other decisions that have to be made. And name, image, and likeness is going to present a lot of decisions to be made, especially when it comes to, should I take this opportunity or not? Should I hire this potential marketing agent or not? Having a repeatable process is going to help through that.
I love it. Repeatable process. It's not only going to help in these decisions around NIL, but it's going to help them in their everyday lives. And that's exactly how we teach at TeamAltemus as well. We, if you're discussing the process of REAP and you ask student athletes to reflect back on their decision, what school they wanted to go to, likely they and their parents and whoever else they sought help from actually went through the REAP process and didn't know they were doing it. So I think it's a critical point for them to realize that the things they're doing every day are a series of processes, and they don't need to complicate things more. Money and legal issues are very complex. We don't need them to complicate all of this more with getting into the issues, but rather practice these repeatable processes.
That's right. And when you have a process, it helps you to realize that you're not necessarily making a binary decision, right? It's not a, yes, I'm going to do this deal, or no, I'm not going to do this deal. It may very well help you to say, when do I want to start even looking at opportunities, right? Because we already know that if you're in football, in college football, and you have an opportunity presented to you your freshman year, well, you're going to be there for at least 3 years. So, you might want to, your decision-making process may lead you to say, you know what, I'm going to wait. Maybe I'm going to wait until my sophomore year when I've got, much more film on me. I've got more followers. I've developed my brand a little bit better. And then I can, potentially seek additional or higher compensation as opposed to what I'm being offered now. So, but it's having a process that helps you to actually think critically about, all that's going on around you. So we've talked decision making. Let's get into this due diligence, right? And so, due diligence is kind of twofold in a way. When you think about it, you've got the idea of, these potential marketing opportunities themselves, but then also the advisors that are going to be involved and engaged or want to be involved and engaged with these players, right? So where do you even start with that? How do you kind of start in this due diligence process so that you can ultimately protect yourself from being taken advantage of, either from an unscrupulous advisor or agent, or from a deal that really isn't, in line with kind of what you want to do long term?
Absolutely. It's so important. And again, they've done the due diligence of self at this point, and now they're going to have to start doing due diligence on the external business professionals and providers. And Luke, all of a sudden, these student athletes are going to have everybody coming at them. Everybody who comes at professional athletes today are going to be coming at D1, D2, D3 athletes all over the country. And the most important thing with due diligence, it's like the R of REAP. It's identifying who these people are and who do I need to hire. So when you have everybody from financial advisors to agents to lawyers to marketing reps, insurance salespeople, branding reps, all of these people will be coming at them. There'll be an onslaught of phone calls, and they're very, very good at making athletes feel secure and making athletes feel like they need them. I mean, that's what they do. And I'm not saying that they're all bad actors, as you know, we heard Seth Greenberg talk about his concerns on our first webinar, but they may not have the athlete's best interest in mind. And they may have the best intention to, but they haven't worked with 18 to 21-year-olds before. Right. So they need to understand the roles, and that's what we do. We walk them through all the people who coming at them, what roles they play in life, hypothetically in their life if they were to hire them. And then based on their decision to participate or not and how they want to proceed, we help them decide who they really need to hire. Do they really need a marketing rep right now? And why? Do they really need a financial advisor right now? And why? So we make sure that they're educated on the types of people that will be coming at them, make sure that they're educated on who they need to hire. We instruct them in various due diligence workshops around advisor management system, which is key. And some of them may, if they have family and or outside advisors that have worked with young athletes before, may know to do this, but most don't, and it's critical in the time management of all of these different activities. And if they don't set up an advisor management process, they're really gonna, I mean, they're just gonna have too much time. They could spend all day, every day on phone calls. We also help them with first level screens. We teach them about why that's important, why getting as much public information as possible on these individuals is important. It's not just about fraud. As you know, I like to say, if you're reading about something fraudulent, it's too late. It's about getting to know these people. If they're trusting them with divulging anything from their personal goals to actually managing their money, they need to know as much as they can about this person. And again, there's no time to do that. So we teach them how to do it in a time efficient way. We teach them how to use the information that they get, how to ask questions. We then,
and I didn't want to interrupt, but I want to make the analogy because I think I love that aspect. I love hearing about this due diligence piece because, you know, when you think about it, these athletes are used to this screening, right? They watch film all the time. They train all the time. They have people who are scouting other teams all the time to give them that information so that on the sports field, they have the information and can make smart decisions based on what they see happening. So it only makes sense when we share that with them in that way that they can understand the importance of doing that. And you call it first level screen. I want to make sure that I highlight that because that first level screen of understanding, you know, who these people are that want to be around them, that's critical for the student athletes so that they're not taken advantage of, but it's also critical too so that when they do come to their athletic administrators, you know, with a question or something along those lines, they can share with them, hey, I've done some of this information, done some of the screening already. Here's what I've found. Like, what are some of your thoughts? So I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to put a pin on that because I think that's such an important, you know, concept to remember.
No, and it's great because it feeds right into what we always talk about, ongoing monitoring. You know, to extend the analogy, watching the film, you know, you think you've studied this person that you're up against on the field, on the court in the next game, and you think you know pretty well how that game's going to flow and understand their cadence and know how to guard them or you know, move the ball against them. And if something happens that you're not expecting, you're able to pivot and you're able to study and understand why. It's exactly what they need to do with business professionals. Always continue the ongoing monitoring. And the more you know up front, the more baseline information you have about this person, the more you know when things are changing. So all those stories about these advisors that, you know, all of a sudden turn bad, that's not really what happens. They usually get in over their head and it's a process and it takes time. And if you look back, you can always see where the red flags pop up. So I love the analogy. I love putting a pin on it. And it's, again, back to what we talk about. It's the same thing they're doing every day. It just happens to be that these are very complex issues of money and legal issues. And finally, on due diligence, we will help them with the actual interviews, what questions to ask, how to ask them. You know, we've done, when we do the elite symposiums with the football and men's basketball players, we get them involved. We get them to participate in mock interviews with financial advisors. And they have to think on their feet. They have to think critically, like you talked about. And it's the best way to really teach them how to think when they're sitting across the table from one of these people that they might be hiring. So, you know, I'd love to, in this subject of due diligence, you know, from your expertise and your perspective, what about, you know, due diligence around marketing and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so, you know, I think, so similarly, you know, in one of the places that we kind of overlapped in presenting is with the NCAA and their elite symposiums. And we always talk about the decision-making aspect there. But when you think about decision-making, now it helps you when you're evaluating information to really understand name, image, and likeness opportunities. That's all a matter of evaluating this information, right? You want to evaluate the information on a particular opportunity from a marketing perspective by knowing what's the scope of services. So what do I have to do is going to be critically important, right? Especially as you mentioned earlier, Courtney, just the timing and this idea of potentially adding a third full-time job. Is this marketing agreement asking me to send a few tweets, or is this asking me to show up for various events and be present at certain, you know, autograph signings or events or things like that that are going to take, you know, more time? Evaluating the compensation, right? What am I getting compensated, and does the compensation align with what is being asked of me, what services I actually have to do? What is it saying about my intellectual property, right? Understanding, like, are they going to continue to, whatever the organization is that's bringing me in, will they continue to own or have rights to certain aspects of my intellectual property, of my brand, of my name, image, and likeness going forward? And if so, am I being compensated for that use in the future? It's also, you know, kind of comes back to the brand authenticity, right? I mean, those are the few things that I mentioned deal with kind of the contractual parts of things. But generally speaking, like, does this align with my brand? I mean, is this something that aligns with, you know, with kind of who I am? So that's something, again, that athletes are going to have to do due diligence on to really understand, you know, these various aspects of a particular marketing opportunity. But the other piece that I think oftentimes gets overlooked, and Courtney, I know we've had this conversation before around entrepreneurship. And when the average person hears name, image, and likeness, they think of marketing deals, and they think of these big, you know, Nike and Gatorade and all this kind of stuff. Well, there's also this entrepreneurship aspect that says, all right, now I'm going to have the ability as a student athlete, like other non-athlete students have had for years, to potentially, you know, create a business around an idea that I have, a service that I want to offer, or a product that I might want to develop. And in doing that, there has to be some real understanding of, you know, some of the corporate formalities that will come with that, understanding, you know, am I doing this myself, or I'm bringing in partners? And if I'm bringing in partners, the complexity of an operating agreement, you know, bookkeeping, and how am I going to keep up with that? I mean, we talked about the idea of a third full-time job. This very well could be it in terms of like the entrepreneurship aspect. So student athletes have to understand all that comes with that, right? The accounting, insurance, managing liabilities. I mean, all of that comes with it. But at the same time, there will be students who might say, okay, I have this particular skill. I do want to be able to commercialize it in ways that I can, you know, go do camps and clinics and coaching and things like that, where maybe I do need to set up an entity for that. Maybe there are some tax benefits, maybe there's some liability protections there, but there's going to be due diligence that has to happen to make sure that ultimately these athletes are protected and not getting out too far ahead of, you know, their skis, as they say.
Absolutely.
So in thinking about that, so we've got through the D and the D. We've talked about decision making. We've talked about due diligence, but now the part that everybody wants to talk about, right? it's the money, right? And so, you know, it's very interesting because from a financial literacy, financial management perspective, Courtney, I know that you see folks at all levels, and so you've got the basic kind of entry level financial literacy. You know, what is a stock and what is a bond, or what is checking versus saving versus charge card, credit card, whatever that might be. But then you've got the more complex, advanced levels of financial management And both of these are needed when an athlete is considering opportunities that are presented to themselves. So how do you kind of even walk people through this? How do you help them understand kind of the breadth of financial understanding that they need to be successful in these environments?
Well, the first thing we do is work with the individual school to see what resources they already have, because we're not looking to come in and completely start over and reinvent any wheels around money, because every program tries hard with these student athletes to educate them. So we assess what programs are in place and don't look to usurp those programs, but to come in and complement them and enhance the overall education for the student athletes. So it generally will break down into two broad issues: basic financial literacy, which includes everything from banking to budgeting to balancing a checkbook, monitoring, and then financial advisor due diligence, which is what we spoke about before. Obviously, our expertise is in finance. We help with due diligence of all outside professionals, but specifically with financial advisors. I was one for over 25 years, and as you said, worked with people at all levels, from professional athletes to multi-billionaires. And so the issues are the same, the complexities change. So we always start with, akin to REAP, our formula for success, which is a similar repeatable process: strategize, innovate, execute. You always have to have a plan. You don't step on the field or the court or the track without a plan. Don't know about you, but I always experience that plans never go according to plan. So you need to step back and readjust, innovate. Everybody loves that word. Everybody loves to talk about innovating. All it means is doing something differently. And then you execute. And similar to what we talked about before with REAP, where you can actually help them recall when they've actually practiced REAP, i.e. deciding what school to go to. Our student athletes, when we're working with them, realize that strategize, innovate, execute is something they do every day. And it's just now going to need to be applied to money. So not only is it a repeatable process, but we also teach them it has to be part of their daily habit. If we're teaching them budgeting, it has to be part of their daily habit. They don't get better at their sport if they're not practicing daily. They don't get better and they don't get stronger without the right nutrition, without the right conditioning, without the right rest. So anything related to money is also a daily habit. We make sure that we talk about what are their goals, short-term, long-term. All financial decisions should be tied to goals, period. So if they haven't taken a look at themselves in that critical due diligence of self process, they need to now, because creating a plan for money around self, around family, has to be tied to goals. So we do a lot with goal setting. So many pieces of money these student athletes have never seen before. Some of them have never paid taxes. Some of them don't understand how interest works. They may understand the tiny little bit of interest they see in their checking account, but they may not have seen a credit card bill yet. So we talk to them about good interest, bad interest. We talk about financial aid implications. Those that are not full scholarship. What does that look like 5 years, 10 years down the road? And maybe that becomes something that's tied to a goal, and to a goal around NIL, to make sure that they are not in a place where they're really struggling because of financial aid during school. So it's those broad areas. It always goes back to the repeatable process, which tends to almost oversimplify it when we're talking about it. But as they practice it and they realize how they apply it, and it becomes, they truly start to compete with themselves. They check their balances. Those balances are going up, and they have a budget, and they're checking if they're meeting that budget or if they're exceeding their goals or not meeting their goals. And it just becomes part of life. And that's what money needs to be, especially in the age of name, image, and likeness, because back to that whole element of time management, if it's not part of their daily routine, they're not going to have time to do it. So, I think, again, always trying to oversimplify, but I think it's so important, our collective collaboration of DDMC, and not just the decision making, but then applying that decision making to due diligence, and then talking about that money concept making as many relatable processes able to apply to that money concept, teaching them to apply it to the money concept, meeting them where they are, whether it's the school and what programs they have, or what the student athletes know or don't know. We don't want to waste time and review concepts that they might already know. We want to join them where they are and help them apply all these concepts in a practical way every day. So that's money in a tiny little nutshell, and way over simplified, but to answer your question, explain a little bit how we approach it, how we talk about it, how we teach it. It's always incredibly engaging, whether it's virtual or in person. And then that follow-up to make sure that those daily habits are happening. So now that I have finished my most exciting part of DDMC, the money part, I want to ask you to talk about contracts. I mean, talk about complexity. That blows my mind that these student athletes are now going to have to be considering legal implications that could impact them for the rest of their lives. You know, if they lose all their money, which they won't if they're getting properly educated, but you can always go out and get another job. You can always go out and get make more money somewhere. You just have to work hard. Contracts can straddle you for the rest of your life if you're not careful.
Yeah, listen, I hope we all have another few hours to sit here and listen to contracts. But I'll try to condense it as briefly as possible. But I mean, this is it, right? I mean, contracts. Every aspect of DDMC that we've talked about is important, obviously. And I think that, you know, when you get down to kind of brass tacks, right, money and student athletes' ability to understand and manage money, and contracts, the ability to understand what it is that you're putting pen to paper to sign your name to, are just so critically important for them to understand. So contracts. When I think about teaching contracts to student athletes and to athletic administrators to understand what these endorsement contracts look like, to understand what these advisor contracts look like, it's not to make the user, if you will, the student athlete or the athletic administrator or the parents or the family sports lawyers. It's not to make them experts in this, but it's to help them understand things that areas that could absolutely be areas where they could be taken advantage of, where the student athlete might be taken advantage of. Because you're right, Courtney. I mean, you really could be, you know, kind of saddled with a bad contract for a long period of time if you don't know exactly what it is that you're signing. So let's think about what this looks like, right? Let's talk first about these contracts with advisors or agents. Now, I'll say as a disclaimer, we don't know exactly what the regulatory regime is going to look like when it comes to the NCAA rules on this, right? We don't know if there will be a third-party administrator kind of overseeing some of these things or not. But regardless, you still should know what it is that you're signing. Every athlete should know that. And I bring up athletic administrators very intentionally because at the end of the day, people who work in the athletic department, from student athlete development to the counselors and academic counselors to coaching staff, etc., you really are the frontline people that a student athlete is going to go to. So if they have a question about something, you already know they come to you first. And so this idea of education, all of the things that we talk about, it's for the student athlete, but it's also critically important that those who the athlete turn to most frequently fully understand these things as well. So when we think about these contracts for advisors or agents, first and foremost, when I think about a college student athlete signing on to an agreement, I'd want to know the term. How long are they signing on for? So let me give you some background before I dig into that a little bit. So I'm a sports lawyer. I work with professional athletes. I review these agent agreements all the time. And we consistently have people who get referred to us who have signed an agreement with an agent that they then want to get out of. And that's one of the first things that we look at, term and termination. How long is this contract, you know, in place for? And how can you terminate the contract? What does it take for you to get out of that contract? Those two pieces are critically important because that allows for the flexibility of that athlete to be able to move away from someone that they don't necessarily click with, align with, trust, or want to continue to work with. I mean, let's think about this, right? We're talking about 18, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-olds who are, you know, in a position where maybe they've never had, you know, a job before, right? Or they've never gone through an interview process or themselves even, right, to be hired for something, but now they're going to be hiring someone else. So we talked about this due diligence process, the first line screening that Courtney talked about earlier, but ultimately now you're going to be signing an agreement with this advisor. Now, the advisor may have all the best intentions in the world, and they may be a qualified advisor to be able to do these things, but what's important is that there's an understanding to be able to say, how can I get out of this if we just don't click? If we just don't seem to like get along, can I get out of this contract? And when you're in college, if you sign a contract that's a, you know, whatever, a 4 or 5 year contract, right? And you're a freshman, like you're locked in. You don't have the ability to get out unless the termination provision allows for you to do that with a certain period of notice. I mean, without going into a deep legal analysis, if we look at the Zion Williamson lawsuit with Prime Sports Marketing, it's all public information as their court filings. You can look and see a contract that is the term and termination are absolutely not in favor of the student athlete. And so that's where we have to be really careful. They need to understand how long they're signing for and how can they get out of the contract. They also have to understand the scope and understanding what services are is the agent or the advisor providing, how much are they charging, right? Most people would say that the industry average is 20% that a marketing agent is going to get, but helping a player to understand that and understand kind of what that means, and to realize that even though the industry average or the industry norm is 20%, doesn't mean that's what you have to agree to. If you have the leverage to negotiate, then you might be able to negotiate 10% or 12.5% or less. So again, all of this DDMC that we talk about is how do we empower, right? You empower through education, and it's all about educating these athletes to make informed decisions. But there's also this ongoing monitoring that has to happen with these advisors. Are they doing what they're supposed to do? Do you have the rights? Do you have the rights in the agreements you have with them to get reports back on a monthly basis, a quarterly basis of the deals that they've acquired for you, the payouts, etc., right? So that you have that ability to have oversight over what's supposed to be happening. And then ultimately, again, talking about a young person here, potentially firing an advisor or an agent. And what does that process look like? How do you do that? And more importantly, how do you do that within the limits of the contract? And if the contract calls for 15 days, you know, prior written notice, or 30 days prior written notice, or what have you, to terminate, that the athlete understands that they can't just send, you know, leave a voicemail or be like, hey, I'm not working with you anymore, or send a DM in Instagram like, hey, I'm going with somebody else. Like, you've signed a legal contract, you have to really understand how do you, you know, uphold your end of that contract as well. So you need to understand it. That's with advisors and agents, but there's also this aspect of the contracts that you would sign with the actual brand that you're working with, or whatever the marketing opportunity is, whether it's a speaking engagement, a marketing, an endorsement type of deal, anything that you're going to sign where you're going to get compensated. Again, the player needs to understand that contract as well. Now, I'll let you in on a little secret that I think a lot of people know, but it's not often articulated. The players and the agents typically, this is generalization, but in my experience, they typically care about two things. How much are they getting paid, and what do they have to do for that amount of money, right? That's what they care most about. But there's so much more that goes into that they really need to understand. And so when an agent tells a player, hey, I found this deal for you, you just need to, you know, do this and you'll get paid X, and just sign here, that is not in the best interest of the player. The player needs to really understand the totality of that contract. So yes, the scope of services is important. So I need to send X number of tweets or social media posts, Instagram posts, you know, with me using this product or wearing this product. Okay, great. But now let's also talk about what's required from a disclosure perspective by the FTC when it comes to promotion. Whose responsibility is that to have those disclaimers, you know, appropriately included, right? Is the brand going to provide that to the player, or is the player going to have to, you know, talk to the agent or figure it out themselves, right? So that should be included in that scope of services and more details as to the social media side of things. Compensation, they need to understand what they're getting paid and how they're getting paid, right? And is it going to be something that gets paid directly to the player, and then the player, the gross amount, and the player has to send that percentage on to their agent, or does everything go to the agent and then the agent takes their fee and then sends that to the player? The player needs to understand this. They need to understand how the mechanics work, and deals are all different. And so understanding these contracts can help them then lead them to more informed decisions. They need to understand the intellectual property and the protections that they have. They need to understand things like indemnification, which is something that, you know, most folks don't even think about. But if they're on the set filming a commercial or a photo shoot and a light fixture wasn't properly secured and it falls and hurts them, who can they go after? Because I see a lot of contracts that say that only in the instances of gross negligence or willful misconduct can the talent go after the brand. But if somebody at the brand or their contractor negligently put together the light fixture, and it wasn't intentional, it wasn't gross negligence, it was just basic negligence, they had a duty to secure it and they did it, well, then the players should still have the rights to go after them for that. And so it's just a matter of understanding all that goes into it. And then finally, you know, for those types of agreements, what happens at the end of it? What happens when I have done the services that you've asked me to do? Does that automatically terminate the contract? Is there any type of ongoing, you know, lingering aspects of that contract that I need to understand? What happens if I want to terminate the contract? If I want to get out of it early, I realize that it's taking more time than I thought. And I listened to Courtney's time management presentation, and now I'm trying to figure out, I might need to get out of this. Do I have the ability to do that? And what would it take to do that? So again, you know, I'm just barely even brushing the surface, but when we talk to these athletes about this, most college athletes have never seen an endorsement deal. Yeah. They've never seen, Courtney, one of these deals that they're going to sign, because I see it at the pro level. And so when they transition to the pros, and the first time they see an endorsement deal, they have no idea what it is that they're signing. They just know that it's a lot of words on a bunch of pages, and they're looking for the dollar sign, but they need to understand so much more. And if we really are focused on protecting athletes and really focused on making sure that they can make informed decisions, they have to understand these contracts, and being able to show them redacted versions of real endorsement contracts is an easy way to engage them in the conversation so that they can ultimately learn a little bit more about what their experience is going to be like when we move into a name, image, and likeness environment. So again, that's what it looks like from these advisor and endorsement deal contracts. And then lastly, it's just thinking, to your point, Courtney, when you talked earlier about the due diligence of all the team that's around them, whether it's a lawyer or an accountant or an advisor or an agent or what have you, what are those agreements that those individuals are asking you to sign, making sure that you understand them and your responsibilities before you sign them. So a lot to get into in contracts, but what's important to remember is what you sign your name to is everything. And so you've got to make sure that you're making an informed decision.
Absolutely. And it, you know, just gets back to our main point of educating these student athletes starting yesterday to prepare for name, image, and likeness, because they haven't seen these contracts. They haven't seen these deals. Some of them have never made money before, so they don't have the education. And we want them to be successful. We don't want, after all these decades of arguing about whether athletes should be compensated or not, we don't want it to be an abysmal failure for the first 5 years because nobody has the knowledge. Knowledge is power, and we are trying to empower these athletes. And, you know, any athlete who does all the right things, due diligence of self, decision-making, due diligence of their advisors, learning about the contracts, and have successful name, image, and likeness ventures, if they haven't learned what to do with their money, none of it matters. Because if they don't understand that they need to set aside money for taxes and comes tax time and they don't have the money to write that check, all of the other great things about them, including their personal brand, are going to take a hit. So it's so important. And, you know, I think it speaks again to why we believe so firmly in DDMC, and why together between TeamAltemus and Anomaly, we cover so much of the critical education that needs to come to these student athletes. And mentioning that, our curriculum and our offerings are going to be on our website. We do have a joint offering, which we're very proud of, and think, you know, in terms of education, especially now before the regulations, can really help schools get these student athletes ready ahead of time so they're not distracted come July next year. So Luke, I'm going to turn it over to you to wrap it up for us, but just can't emphasize enough the need for education and making sure the full DDMC curriculum is getting to these student athletes.
Yeah, that's right. I think, you know, just thank you for tuning in and checking kind of this conversation out. Again, TeamAltemus, Anomaly Sports Group, you know, we're separate entities, but we're really focused on how do we protect and educate athletes, period. And so when you come across, as we all know, when you come across good people in the sports world, you want to stick with them and try to figure out ways that you can leverage your synergies. And that's what we've done. And so hopefully you found this conversation today beneficial. Obviously, if you want more information, you can reach out to us. We'll have our contact information listed at the end of this recording. And I will let you know that this fall, we're going to do a live joint webinar. Again, I guess that'll be number 5 or so that we've done. And it's going to be a compliance perspective. And we've had conversations with schools where compliance it's going to be a critical component to name, image, and likeness. And so we want to make sure that we bring that information to you all as well. So look for that information coming out. But again, thank you for tuning in. Courtney, always great to partner with you in these conversations. Seems like the time just kind of flies by. But again, for you joining in, thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to talking to you again real soon. Have a great day.
Thanks, Luke. Take care.